I was abandoned at 15 days old, cheated on while pregnant at 25, and it took me 15 years to understand that the biggest abandonment was my own, of myself. My name is Victoria, but everyone calls me Vicky. I was born in Phoenix, Arizona, on a hot summer day where the thermometer hit 110 degrees Fahrenheit. My mother held me in her arms for exactly 2 weeks before leaving me with my aunt and uncle. My younger aunt had just been diagnosed with a serious illness, and my mother needed to take care of her. I was just a baby, but something in me already knew I had been left behind. Psychologists call this early abandonment trauma. I call it the day I learned not to need anyone. Because when you're abandoned before you even know how to walk, you grow up with a hole in your chest that no hug can completely fill. I eventually grew up going back to my biological family, but those first weeks had left an invisible mark. I learned from early on to be too independent, to never ask for help, to always choose solitude over the vulnerability of depending on someone. My family seemed perfect from the outside, house with the yard, dog, barbecues on Sundays, but I always felt like I didn't quite fit in, as if part of me was still in that crib at 15 days old, waiting for someone to come back. At school, I was the weird girl who preferred the library to fitting in. The bullying came with adolescence. They called me strange, problematic, a rebel without a cause. The truth is, I had built walls so high around myself that no one could get in, and I didn't know how to get out. I developed a strong personality, sometimes aggressive, as a defense mechanism. If I was going to be rejected anyway, let it be on my terms. I was labeled as the difficult teenager, when really I was just a wounded child trying to survive. It was in this context that I met Thomas at 19. He was 22, worked as an IT technician, and had that calm demeanor that contrasted completely with my explosive personality. We met at a Starbucks near Arizona State University, where I had just started studying communications. He laughed at my sarcastic jokes. He didn't try to fix me or tell me I should smile more. For the first time in my life, someone seemed to accept me exactly as I was. Prickly, complicated, difficult. Or at least that's what I thought. In the first months, Thomas seemed like the answer to everything I never knew I was looking for. He was patient with my angry outbursts. He listened when I talked about my childhood. I, who had spent my whole life building walls, started letting him in. It was the first time I considered the possibility that maybe, just maybe, I could trust someone. The relationship evolved too fast. In 6 months, we were living together in a small apartment in Tempe. I divided my time between classes, part-time work at a cafe, and trying to be the perfect girlfriend. He worked irregular hours, always with plausible excuses, client emergency, server down, impossible traffic. I believed because I wanted to believe. We started talking about the future, about getting married, about having kids. It was around this time that I started noticing small, strange things. Messages he deleted too quickly, conversations he abruptly ended when I entered the room, an occasional different perfume on his clothes. But I pushed these observations to the back of my mind, labeled my intuition as paranoia, as insecurity, as remnants of that abandoned girl who still didn't trust anyone. At 24, I discovered I was pregnant. It wasn't planned, but it also wasn't completely surprising. When I saw the 2 lines on the drugstore test, my whole world stopped. I sat on the cold bathroom floor and cried. I don't know if from fear or relief. Fear because I could barely take care of myself, let alone a baby. Relief because finally, I would have someone who couldn't abandon me, someone who would be mine forever. When I told Thomas that night, he was silent for so long, I thought he was going to walk out the door and never come back. But then he smiled, a smile that didn't reach his eyes, and said we would make it work. He proposed 2 weeks later at the same Starbucks where we met. I said yes, because I wanted to believe I was building something real, something permanent. We scheduled the wedding for 2 months later, a small ceremony at the courthouse. My mother cried, but I didn't know if it was from happiness or worry. I got married in a simple dress from Macy's, 4 months pregnant, believing I had finally found my place in the world. I was in my 6th month of pregnancy when the first betrayal I couldn't ignore happened. It was a Saturday afternoon. Thomas had said he was meeting a friend to play basketball. I was home with nausea when I received a message from an unknown number. It was a photo. Thomas kissing another woman in the parking lot of a bar I knew well. The message said only, "Thought you should know. I'm sorry." My stomach turned, and it wasn't because of the pregnancy. My hands were shaking so much I almost dropped the phone. When Thomas finally arrived at 7 p.m., sweaty and smiling, he asked if I wanted to order pizza for dinner as if nothing had happened. I showed him the photo. I watched his face go through several stages: shock, anger, then that calculated expression I would learn to recognize so well. He denied. Said it was Photoshop, that someone was trying to break us up, that I was crazy for believing a random message. He yelled at me, turned the situation around, asked why I didn't trust him, said my abandonment issues were making me see things that didn't exist. I was 6 months pregnant, financially dependent on him, living in an apartment in his name. Where would I go? So I did what thousands of women do every day. I swallowed my intuition, pushed my suspicions to a dark corner of my mind, and decided to believe his version. I decided it was easier to be deceived than to face the truth. I decided my child deserved a father, even if that father was a lie. That was the first time I abandoned myself. It wouldn't be the last. Ryan was born on a January day, weighing 7 pounds and 3 ounces, with a strong cry that echoed through the delivery room. When the nurse placed him in my arms, I felt a love so overwhelming I thought my chest would explode. I looked at that red, wrinkled little face and thought, "For you, I'll endure anything. For you, I'll stay." Thomas was in the delivery room, playing the part of proud father. But even in that moment, I noticed how he checked messages between contractions, how he left the room to get some air, right at the most critical moment. The first months with Ryan were a blur of exhaustion. Thomas helped when he was home, but he was home less and less. Always overtime, always work emergencies, always excuses. When Ryan was 4 months old, I got pregnant again. Unplanned, obviously. Sophia was born when Ryan had just turned 1, another beautiful girl who stole my heart the second I saw her. With 2 babies and a marriage cracking at the foundations, I became an expert at pretending everything was fine. I posted photos on Facebook of the happy family. I smiled at family gatherings. Thomas pulled away more and more, and I dove deeper into motherhood as a way to avoid facing the obvious. He came back later and later, his excuses got flimsier and flimsier, and I pretended harder that I believed. It was when Ryan was 3 and Sophia was 2 that Thomas came home one day with a completely unexpected proposal. He had received a job offer in the Netherlands, in Amsterdam. A tech company was looking for American professionals to expand. The salary was double what he was making. We would have a better life in Europe. My parents were shocked. My friends thought we were crazy. But to me, it seemed like a second chance, a fresh start, a way to leave behind all the betrayals and suspicions and start over in a new place where no one knew our story. We arrived in Amsterdam on a gray October afternoon, tired from the transatlantic flight, 2 crying babies, lost luggage, speaking 0 Dutch. The apartment the company had arranged was small, in the De Pijp neighborhood. It was strange and exciting at the same time. The bicycles everywhere, the narrow houses, the smell of stroopwafels, people speaking that guttural language I didn't understand. Thomas started working immediately, leaving early and coming back late. I stayed home with Ryan and Sophia, trying to navigate a different health system, a different language, a completely different culture. I had no family nearby, no friends, no support network. It was just me, 2 small children, and the deepest loneliness I'd ever felt in my life. In the first 6 months, I cried almost every day. Thomas didn't notice, or he noticed and didn't care. He was too busy adapting to the new job, too busy to notice his wife was drowning. But something interesting happened in the midst of all this chaos. I started rebuilding myself in ways I didn't expect. I learned Dutch faster than Thomas because I had to. I got a part-time job at an American company operating in Amsterdam, doing corporate communications. For the first time in years, I had an identity beyond Thomas's wife and Ryan and Sophia's mom. I earned my own money, had my own coworkers, talked about things beyond diapers and baby food. I started feeling strong again, competent, capable. And the stronger I became, the more Thomas seemed to resent it. He complained that I was working too much, that I was becoming too independent. Those words should have been a giant red flag, but I still wasn't ready to see. The truth I would discover later was much more sinister. Thomas didn't want a strong and independent wife. He wanted someone who depended completely on him, someone who was easy to control, someone who wouldn't ask questions when he disappeared for hours. We lived in Amsterdam for 2 years before the facade really started to crack. 2 years of me building a life, making expat friends, improving at work. 2 years of Thomas becoming more and more distant, more absent, more obviously a liar. He started traveling a lot, for work. Berlin, London, Barcelona, sometimes for a whole week. When he came back from these trips, he brought expensive gifts for the kids. Guilt bought with a credit card. But he never brought anything for me. Never asked how my week had been. One night, after the kids were asleep, I walked into the office without knocking. Thomas closed the laptop so fast he almost broke the screen. He looked at me with an anger in his eyes that made me instinctively step back. "You can't just invade my space," he said, with a coldness that cut deeper than any scream. It was in that moment, looking at the man I had crossed an ocean to try to save our marriage, that I finally admitted to myself what I had known for years. I had married a stranger, and now I was trapped 5,000 miles from home with him. The first cracks in the facade don't come like earthquakes. They come like whispers, like small inconsistencies you note mentally, but decide to ignore because confronting them would mean admitting something is fundamentally wrong. It was on a March morning, 3 years after our arrival in the Netherlands, that I found the first thread that would unravel everything. Ryan had a fever, Sophia had woken up at 5 in the morning, I was exhausted, and needed Thomas's phone to call the pediatrician because mine was dead. He was still sleeping after another late night working. I grabbed his iPhone from the nightstand, and when the screen lit up with my touch, I saw a notification that made my stomach turn. It was a message from someone saved as Marco Work, but the message preview said, "Last night was amazing, love. Can't wait to see you again. Marco. Work. Love." My brain froze trying to make these words make sense together, but they didn't. They couldn't. I stood there, holding that phone like it would burn my hand, hearing Ryan coughing in the next room, feeling Sophia pulling my pajama pants asking for breakfast. I clicked on the message, but it needed a password. Of course it did. I tried his birthday. Nothing. Our wedding date? Nothing. The kids' birthdays? Nothing. Each failed attempt was a confirmation of the obvious. I didn't really know this man. Never had. I put the phone back exactly where it was, picked up Ryan still feverish, held Sophia's hand, and went down the narrow stairs on autopilot. I made breakfast, gave Ryan medicine, put on a show for Sophia. And then I sat on the living room couch and let my mind process what I already knew but didn't want to admit. Marco wasn't a coworker, and that wasn't the first message of that kind Thomas had received. In the following days, I watched Thomas like he was a stranger. The way he always put his phone face down. How he left the room to take work calls. How he took long showers as soon as he got home, before even properly greeting the kids. How his clothes always smelled of an expensive perfume that definitely wasn't mine or his. Small details that individually meant nothing, but together painted a picture I had refused to see. I started mentally noting his absences, his excuses, his patterns. Meeting that's going late. Client needing emergency support. Drinks with the office people. Always plausible enough not to question. Always vague enough not to verify. Paranoia started consuming me in ways I'd never experienced before. I checked the car's GPS history. I looked for receipts in his pants pockets before washing. I paid attention to every word of his phone conversations I could hear through the doors. I became a detective in my own home, and I hated who I was becoming but couldn't stop. Part of me knew that if I looked hard enough, I'd find proof. The other part was terrified of what I'd do with that proof when I found it. I was stuck in a foreign city with 2 small kids. My job barely paid enough to cover daycare. I had no family to support me financially if everything fell apart. This is the trap women get stuck in every day. They know something is wrong, but the cost of acting seems greater than the cost of enduring. So they endure, and endure, until they can't anymore. Ryan started asking questions that pierced my heart. "Mommy, why doesn't Daddy have dinner with us anymore? Why doesn't Daddy play with me unless you ask him to? How do you explain to a 5-year-old that his father is emotionally absent without destroying the image he has of his father?" I started creating elaborate excuses. Daddy works a lot because he loves you and wants to give you a good life. Daddy is tired. Every lie I told the kids was a betrayal to myself. Sophia, at 3, was too young to articulate, but she felt it too. She clung to me with desperate intensity, Cried when I left for work, had frequent nightmares. Children always know when something is wrong, even when you paint smiles over the chaos. My expat friend Sarah started noticing something was wrong. She commented over coffee that I looked tired, sad. "Is everything okay with you and Thomas?" I gave the automatic answer. "Oh, you know how it is. Adjusting to life in Europe, small kids, stressful work." She didn't seem convinced but didn't insist, and I was grateful. Because admitting out loud that my marriage was falling apart would make it real in a way I still wasn't ready to face. Isolation is as much a choice as an imposition. Thomas discouraged friendship subtly. He complained when I scheduled meetups. He was moody when I came back from happy hours. Gradually, I stopped accepting invitations. I became smaller and smaller until my world consisted only of work, children, and trying not to completely fall apart. Insomnia came slowly and then all at once. It evolved into entire nights awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to Thomas snore beside me, imagining where he really was on the nights he came home late. My body was in constant state of alert, nervous system permanently activated, waiting for the next lie, the next betrayal. I lost weight quickly, 10 pounds in 2 months. My clothes hung loose. I started having panic attacks. The first one happened at the Albert Heijn supermarket on a Saturday morning. Suddenly, I couldn't breathe. The shelves were spinning. My heart was beating so fast I thought I was having a heart attack. I sat on the floor between aisles, Ryan and Sophia looking at me scared, while a Dutch employee tried to help me in broken English. Thomas was working that Saturday. Of course he was. I finally decided to check our bank accounts, something Thomas had always controlled exclusively, saying it was better for organization to have one person managing finances. When I got access to online banking, what I found left me frozen. Regular charges from hotels in Amsterdam I had never visited. Expensive restaurants on nights Thomas said he was working late at the office. Purchases at women's clothing stores. Sizes that definitely weren't mine. And then I saw a recurring charge of $800 per month for an apartment in Rotterdam. Rotterdam, the city an hour by train from Amsterdam where Thomas supposedly had important clients he visited every week. My vision blurred. My hands were shaking so much I could barely hold the mouse. He had an apartment. A separate apartment an hour away. For what? For whom? How long? How many lies? I printed the bank statements with trembling hands, hid them in my underwear drawer where I knew he'd never look. Evidence. I finally had concrete and irrefutable evidence. That night, when Thomas came home at 10 with another flimsy excuse, I looked at him and no longer saw the man I met at Starbucks in Phoenix years ago. I saw a stranger, a liar, someone capable of looking into the eyes of his own children and lying without blinking. I sat on the couch, listening to the waterfall as he showered, knowing he was washing away evidence of wherever he'd been, whoever he'd been with. Ryan and Sophia slept in their rooms, innocent of all this chaos. I had built an entire life around that man, left my country, my family, my language, and he had built a secret parallel life financed with our money, sustained with elaborate lies. I waited until the following Sunday. The kids were with expat friends for a play date. Thomas was in the living room watching soccer on his laptop, completely relaxed. I walked in with the printed bank statements, with screenshots of messages I had managed to access, with months of compiled evidence. I put it all on the coffee table in front of him and said with a surprisingly firm voice, "I know about Rotterdam." I watched his face go through multiple expressions in seconds: confusion, recognition, panic, anger. He opened his mouth to deny, but I cut him off. "No, don't lie anymore. I have proof. I know about the apartment. I know about the hotels. I know about the money. So don't insult me by pretending you don't know what I'm talking about." There was a long silence. He looked at the papers, then at me, and something in his face changed. The mask fell. It wasn't remorse I saw. It was irritation at being caught. "You went through our financial stuff?" he said, turning my discovery of betrayal into his privacy invasion. "You have no right to spy on my accounts." My mouth opened in pure shock. "Our money, Thomas," I said, my voice starting to tremble. "It's our money. You're spending our money on what? Who's in that apartment? How long has this been going on?" He sighed, ran his hand through his hair, stayed silent for so long I thought he wouldn't answer. then finally said, with an indifference that hurt more than any scream, "I met someone." 4 words. I met someone. As if it were that simple, that casual, that unimportant. "How long?" I managed to ask. 2 years, he answered without even looking at me. 2 years. While I struggled to learn Dutch, to build a new life, to take care of the kids in a foreign country, he was building a new life with someone else. She lives in Rotterdam. We see each other when I say I'm working late or traveling for work. The apartment is ours, hers and mine. Ours. The way he said that word, with a tenderness he no longer used with me, then he did worse. He turned to me with almost apologetic eyes and said, "Vicky, you and I, we haven't really been happy for years. You must feel that too. Maybe it's time to be honest about what this has become." And there it was. Him turning years of his betrayal into our mutual failure, as if my unhappiness in the marriage was my fault, and not a direct consequence of his lies, his detachment, his double life. The truth, when it finally explodes after years buried, doesn't bring relief. It brings devastation. 2 years. He had maintained another life, another woman, another home for 2 years while I raised our kids alone. All the nights I stayed awake blaming myself for being paranoid. I was right the whole time. "I want a divorce," I heard my own voice say, surprisingly firm considering I was shattered inside. Thomas looked at me with relief. "Okay," he said simply. "But I'll stay in the apartment until we can sort things out legally, for the kids' sake." The following days were surreal. Thomas and I existed like ghosts, passing without eye contact. He slept on the couch. Ryan asked why Daddy was sleeping there. I made up an excuse. Sophia cried more, clung to me with desperation. How do you explain to 5- and 3-year-old kids that their family is falling apart? I called my mother in Phoenix. It was 3 a.m. in Arizona, but I couldn't wait. When I started telling her everything, I cried so violently I could barely speak. "Honey, you need to come home," she said. But it wasn't that simple. I couldn't legally take the kids to another continent. My residence visa was tied to the marriage. I scheduled an appointment with a Dutch attorney named Petra van der Berg. She listened to everything, then said, "In the Netherlands, divorce isn't about fault. Assets are divided 50-50. Custody is usually shared. 50-50. And shared custody meant Ryan and Sophia would spend time with him, would meet her. If you want to go back to the United States with the kids, he needs to agree. If not, you'd face an international custody process that can take years." The physical impact was brutal. I lost weight, down to 112 pounds from 135. Hair falling out. Panic attacks daily. I ended up in the ER twice in 1 week. They said it was anxiety and prescribed medication. I started antidepressants. Meanwhile, I existed in zombie state. Wake up, kids to daycare, work, pick up kids, dinner, bed, meds, cry in bathroom. Thomas was flourishing. He sang in the shower, smiled at his phone, played with the kids with energy he never showed before. His secret was out. He was free. While I was dying inside, he was living. I confronted him. "How did you meet her?" He sighed. "At a bar in Rotterdam, right after we got to Amsterdam. So it started immediately." "Will the kids meet her?" "Eventually, yes. She's an important part of my life. My kids will be part of it too. My kids. Not our kids." I discovered her name. Katja, Dutch, 28, marketing. I stalked her social media. Beautiful, blonde, thin. I found old photos with Thomas in groups. The way she looked at him. I downloaded everything, as if evidence could change something. Each image was a stab. Thomas came to pick up the kids 2 weeks after moving out. He arrived with Katja. She smiled nervously. "Hi, Ryan. Hi, Sophia. I'm Katja. We're going to have so much fun." Ryan looked at me confused. Sophia started crying. Something in me exploded. "No," I said firmly. "Not today. It's too soon. You want your time with them? Fine, but alone. Not with her. Not yet." Thomas saw something in my face and agreed. Katja went back to the car. I watched the kids leave, then went back to the empty apartment for the first time in 5 years. The silence was deafening. I lay on the couch, paralyzed. Couldn't do anything but exist. Hours passed. The apartment got dark. I didn't turn on lights. Eventually, I slept there, still dressed, without dinner, completely destroyed. Thomas moved out the following Saturday. Ryan and Sophia watched confused as Daddy packed boxes. "Daddy's going to live in another place," I explained. Ryan asked, "Why?" "How do you explain betrayal to a 5-year-old? Sometimes adults need to live in different places." "But Daddy and Mommy love you very much." Thomas kissed the kids and left. Sophia started crying, that desperate cry of a child who feels something terrible happened. I found an apartment I could afford in Nord, across the IJ, $200 a month. The kids would share a room, no proper living room. But it was ours, safe, a fresh start. I signed the contract, drained my savings for the deposit. The move happened on a rainy Tuesday. Friends helped. The kids explored their new shared room, smaller than before. Ryan tried to be brave. Sophia cried, wanted the old house back. I wanted the old life back. That first night, after the kids slept, I sat on the floor and looked around. This was all I had now, and I didn't know if I could make it work. The following weeks were pure survival. Routine became everything. Wake up at 6, kids to daycare, ferry to work 8 hours pretending, ferry back, pick up kids, dinner, bath, stories, bed, collapse. Alternate weekends. Thomas took the kids, and I had 48 hours alone that I spent in semi-depression, lying in bed, staring at ceiling. Therapy helped 1 hour a week, but between sessions, the loneliness was crushing. Friends tried to help, but eventually their lives continued while mine was frozen. My family in Arizona was worried, but too far for practical help. My mother offered for me to come back, bring the kids, start over in Phoenix. But it wasn't simple. Custody issues, my job, the fact the kids spoke Dutch now. Going back meant admitting complete defeat. Staying meant continuing to fight alone in a foreign country. There was no good choice, just varying degrees of difficult. I chose to stay, not from courage, but from being too exhausted to make such a massive change. It was on a Thursday night, 3 months after Thomas had moved out, that I hit absolute rock bottom. The kids were in Rotterdam that weekend. I was alone, had stopped eating adequately, was weighing 108 pounds. I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror and didn't recognize the person looking back. Sunken eyes, gray skin, lifeless hair. I was disappearing, becoming a ghost. And part of me was okay with that, because existing as a ghost was easier than existing as a person with all these impossible feelings. I sat on the cold bathroom floor, leaning against the bathtub, and for the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to really think about not continuing. Not actively, not with a plan, but just stop. Stop waking up. Stop fighting. Stop carrying this pain. It would be so much easier, a part of my brain whispered. The kids would be fine with Thomas and Katja. They had a big apartment, resources, stability. Maybe they'd even be better off without a shattered mom who could barely function. That lie depression tells, that everyone would be better off without you. I sat there in the dark for hours, sinking into that thought, and it was the scariest moment of my entire life, until my phone rang, and the voice on the other side gave me a reason I didn't know I was looking for to continue. The phone rang in the darkness of the bathroom where I was sitting on the floor, considering non-existence as a viable option. The sound startled me so violently I dropped the device. It was an unknown number, international. I would normally ignore it, but something, instinct, fate, pure chance, made me answer. "Victoria?" The voice was a woman's, strong American accent, familiar but not immediately identifiable. "It's me, Amanda, from high school, in Phoenix. I got your number from your mom, Amanda." We hadn't spoken in over 10 years. She had been one of the few people who tried to be my friend despite my difficult personality. "Your mom told me what's happening," Amanda continued. "I also went through a difficult divorce 2 years ago. I know what it's like. I just wanted to call and say it's going to get better. I promise it's going to get better." I started crying there on the bathroom floor, this strange moment of human connection piercing through the fog of depression. "You're not alone in this, Vicky," she said gently. "I know it feels like you are, but you're not." We talked for 2 hours. Amanda told me about her own divorce, husband who had cheated for years, 2 small daughters, brutal separation. But she also told me about after, how she rebuilt her life, how she found strength she didn't know she had, how she had eventually found herself. "The first 6 months were hell," she admitted. "I thought I was going to die from pain, but I didn't die. And you won't either. You're going to survive this. You're going to rebuild, and one day you'll be proud of who you became through it. When we hung up, something had changed. I wasn't magically healed, but I had a small spark of possibility. If Amanda had done it, maybe I could too. I got up from the bathroom floor, washed my face, made tea even though it was 2 in the morning. I sat at the window looking at Amsterdam at night and made a decision. Either I saved myself now, actively and intentionally, or I'd sink completely. There was no middle ground anymore. The next morning, I called my therapist and asked for an emergency session. I sat in her office and said, "Last night I seriously considered giving up. The thought was there, and it was real, and it was scary. I need more aggressive help." She adjusted my medication, higher dose of antidepressant, additional mood stabilizer. She scheduled sessions twice a week temporarily. Most importantly, she helped me create a concrete action plan, small daily steps. Depression wants you to stay still, she explained. Movement is resistance. Together we made a list. Walk 15 minutes daily. Eat 3 meals. Call 1 person per day. Sleep on a regular schedule. Small things that were technically possible. I started following the plan with determination born of desperation. First day I walked 10 minutes. Second day, the full 15 minutes. I ate yogurt at breakfast even without hunger. I called Sarah and we talked for 8 minutes. Small victories that felt enormous. The kids came back from Rotterdam on Sunday, and this time when Ryan talked excitedly about the weekend, I managed to listen without feeling a stab in the heart. I started separating my pain from the kids' experience. They could enjoy being with Thomas and Katya, and it didn't diminish their love for me. It wasn't a competition. It wasn't my fault. It was Thomas's choice. 2 weeks after Amanda's call, I felt a small but real difference. I wasn't happy, far from it, but I was functioning better. I woke up without paralyzing dread. I could focus at work. I started gaining weight back slowly. Laughter returned occasionally. These weren't dramatic changes, but they were changes. I scheduled an appointment with lawyer Petra to finalize divorce paperwork. I organized finances, detailed budget, emergency savings account. I updated my resume. Small steps toward control, agency, autonomy. Starting to plan a future was a radical act of hope, when so recently I couldn't imagine any future at all. Sarah noticed the difference over coffee on a Saturday morning. "You seem more present, more you." I smiled, small but genuine. I think I finally came out of pure survival mode and entered very slow rebuilding mode. She squeezed my hand. "I'm proud of you. You're one of the strongest people I know." Strong. Maybe strength wasn't about never breaking. Maybe it was about continuing after breaking, picking up pieces even when they cut your hands. I had no choice but to be strong. The kids depended on me, and I was starting to realize I depended on me too. I couldn't wait for Thomas, for any man, for external salvation. I had to save myself. I had to be my own hero. I decided to do something radical, something just for me. I'd always wanted to travel through Europe, but never had. Thomas never wanted to explore. Now I had alternating weekends alone. Why not travel? The idea was terrifying and exciting. Sarah thought it was brilliant. My therapist agreed it could be therapeutic. I booked a weekend in Bruges, Belgium, just 2 hours by train, close enough not to be too scary. The weekend in Bruges changed something fundamental. I arrived Friday night, nervous. But when I woke up Saturday morning, sun coming through the window, no one needing me, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Freedom. I spent the day walking cobblestone streets, eating Belgian waffles, visiting museums. I sat by the canal for an hour watching swans. I had dinner alone. First uncomfortable, then liberating. No one knew me there. No one knew my story. I wasn't a destroyed, divorced mom. I was just an American woman eating moules frites and drinking wine, existing in the present moment. That night I realized I hadn't thought about Thomas or Katya or pain all day. I had just existed, simply and completely, and it was wonderful. I cried, but they were different tears, not of pain but of relief, of realizing I was still a person beyond the trauma, that joy was still possible. I came back with a new perspective. If I could do one weekend alone, I could do more. I booked Copenhagen, then Paris. Each trip was an act of reclaiming autonomy, identity, the right to exist for myself. I started posting photos on Instagram, small moments of, "I'm here, I'm alive, I'm rebuilding. Friends commented encouragement. Thomas saw and sent a message. I see you're traveling a lot. Good for you. I detected surprise, as if he didn't expect me to get back up. I didn't respond. I didn't owe him explanations. That realization was liberating. For years, I had lived worried about what Thomas thought. Now, it didn't matter. He had made his choices. Now I was making mine. 6 months after Thomas had moved out, I was in a radically different place. I wasn't healed. Healing takes years. But I was stable, functioning, occasionally happy. Therapy continued, medication continued, but I needed both less. I started going out socially again. I laughed more. I slept better. I had unfollowed, blocked Katja completely. I didn't need to monitor her life because I was busy building my own. And my own life, while far from perfect, was starting to seem livable again. It was starting to seem like there was a future, that life existed on the other side of this pain. It was on a Saturday morning in June, drinking coffee on the balcony, kids with Thomas that weekend, that I had a moment of profound clarity. The sun was shining, birds were singing, and I realized I was alone, but I wasn't lonely. I was alone, and I was okay with it. I didn't need a man, a relationship, external validation to feel complete. I had built a life that worked. I had recovered myself. The Victoria from before the marriage had been lost. The Victoria during the marriage had been a shadow. But this Victoria, sitting on that balcony, she was new. She was stronger. She had scars, but also wisdom born from surviving hell. I liked this version of me. For the first time in years, I genuinely liked who I was becoming. The divorce process finalized that summer. Papers signed, assets divided, custody formalized, 50-50 financially. Thomas kept the car. I bought a used bicycle. He didn't fight for primary custody, was satisfied with alternating weekends. When I left Petra's office after signing the final documents, officially divorced, I expected to feel something dramatic. I felt only calm. A chapter had closed. A new one was beginning, and I was ready for it. I was rebuilding not who I was before Thomas, but someone completely new. And then, on a Sunday afternoon at a cafe in Jordan, I met Andreas, and for the first time in years, I considered the possibility that maybe my heart wasn't completely destroyed after all. Andreas didn't enter my life like a hurricane. He entered like a gentle breeze on a Sunday afternoon in September at a cafe in the Jordan, where I had started going regularly to write in the journal my therapist recommended. He was sitting at the next table, laptop open, reading glasses on the tip of his nose, completely absorbed in whatever he was doing. I didn't notice him initially. I was focused on my own world, writing about Ryan starting primary school, about how Sophia had finally stopped crying every morning at daycare, about small victories that marked our rebuilt life. My coffee cup had been empty for a long time when I finally looked up and realized the cafe had emptied, that hours had passed, and that the man at the next table was looking at me with a small, gentle smile. "Sorry," he said in English with an accent I identified as German, "but you were so concentrated I was genuinely curious if you're writing the next great American novel." I laughed. Genuinely, spontaneously. "Just a diary," I replied. "Much less interesting than a novel." "I disagree," he said. "Real stories are always more fascinating than fiction." He introduced himself as Andreas, Greek-German, working in Amsterdam for 5 years as an architect. He asked if he could join my table since the cafe was getting crowded. I said yes, before my brain could create reasons to say no. We talked for an hour about everything and nothing. About Amsterdam, about adjusting to life in the Netherlands, about work, about this place having the best coffee in the neighborhood. I didn't mention the kids initially. Old insecurity about being a divorced mom being a deal breaker. When I finally had to leave, Andreas asked if he could have my number. "For coffee again," he clarified. "If you want, of course. No pressure." I hesitated for just a second before giving it. Andreas texted that night. "It was really nice meeting you today. Would you like to do it again?" I looked at the message for a long time before responding. Yes, I would. And then, because honesty seemed important from the start, "But you should know I have 2 kids and I'm recently divorced. If that's a problem, I completely understand." His answer came quickly. "It's not a problem. Everyone has a past. I'm interested in getting to know you, not in judging where you came from." Our first official date was dinner at a small Greek restaurant in De Pipe. Andreas insisted. He wanted to show real food from his culture. I was nervous. I'd spent the last year rebuilding my identity as an independent woman who didn't need a man. But when I met Andreas outside the restaurant, his smile was so genuine that nervousness diminished. We had moussaka and drank red wine, talked about childhoods, his divided between Athens and Munich, mine and Phoenix. I told him more about the kids. He asked with genuine interest, not performative. And their father? He asked gently. I told him the condensed version: marriage that didn't work, infidelity, recent divorce. Andreas listened without judging, then said, "It must have been incredibly difficult. But look at you now. You survived. You're raising 2 kids alone in a foreign country. You're rebuilding. That's extraordinary." We started seeing each other regularly. Coffees on weekends when the kids were with Thomas, occasional dinners during the week. Andreas never pushed, never asked for more than I was ready to give. When he kissed me for the first time, 5 dates later, walking along the Amstel at sunset, he was gentle, asked permission first. "Can I kiss you?" No one had ever asked permission before. Thomas certainly never had. The respect in that small gesture made me want to cry and say yes simultaneously. I said yes. And the kiss was different from any I'd experienced. Not urgent or possessive, but patient, present, full of possibility instead of demand. 3 months of dating before Andreas met the kids. 3 months of building a foundation just between us, making sure it was real. When I finally introduced them, on a Saturday afternoon at Vondel Park casual setting, I was more nervous than I'd been in years. Ryan was reserved initially, protective of me. But Andreas had brought a kite. My dad used to fly them with me when I was little in Munich. And slowly, Ryan was won over. Sophia latched onto him almost immediately, asking him to push her on the swing higher, higher, higher. Watching Andreas with my kids, patient, present, not trying to be their father, but just a kind man giving them attention, something in my heart started opening again. After the park, we got ice cream. Ryan asked, "Is Andreas your boyfriend, Mommy?" With the brutal frankness of a child. Andreas looked at me, letting me answer. "Yes, honey," I said. "Is that okay?" Ryan shrugged with beautiful carelessness. "I guess so. He's nice." And he was. Andreas was nice in ways Thomas never had been. The difference between Thomas and Andreas was stark. Thomas had been controlling disguised as protection, critical disguised as help. Andreas was genuinely, consistently kind, never raised his voice, never made me feel small. When I had a bad day, he asked how he could help instead of getting irritated. When I talked about trauma from the divorce, he listened without trying to fix. "You went through hell," he said one night, "and yet you're here, strong and amazing. That impresses me every day." But it wasn't just emotional kindness. It was also respect for my autonomy. He never tried to control where I went, who I talked to, what I wore. He celebrated my independence. When I told him about my solo travels through Europe, which I'd continued even after we started dating, he thought it was incredible. "Never give that up," he said firmly. "You need that space for yourself. It's part of who you are." Of course, it wasn't perfect. I had moments of panic where old anxiety screamed that Andreas would also cheat, also lie, that all men were the same. Moments where I checked his phone when he was in the bathroom. Old habits dying hard. Andreas eventually noticed and confronted me gently. "Victoria, you can check my phone whenever you want," he said, handing it to me unlocked. "I have nothing to hide. But more importantly, we need to talk about this distrust because it's not about me, it's about your trauma. And I can't heal that for you, but I can support you while you work on it." The vulnerability in that conversation deepened our relationship in ways I didn't expect. We talked about establishing mutual transparency, not because we didn't trust, but because trust needed to be consciously rebuilt. We shared phone passwords, not to spy, but to remove secrets as a possibility. Radical honesty became the foundation. A year after meeting Andreas, he asked to meet Thomas. Not out of curiosity, but because he's your kid's father, he's part of their lives, and I want to respect that. The idea terrified me, but Andreas insisted he was ready. We scheduled coffee. The 3 adults, no kids. I sat between them, stomach in knots. Thomas was officially with Katja now, living together in Rotterdam. Andreas firmly extended his hand and said, "Good to meet you. Victoria talks about what a good father you are to Ryan and Sophia. Thomas, not expecting kindness, accepted confusedly. They talked briefly about the kids, about logistical arrangements. Andreas made it clear, I'm not trying to replace you as a father, but I love Victoria, and that means Ryan and Sophia are important to me too. I hope we can coexist respectfully for their sake. Thomas agreed. When we separated, I felt something unexpected. Closure. Thomas wasn't a monster, just a man who had made terrible choices. But life continued for all of us. Life started having a new rhythm, functional and occasionally even happy. The week was about work and kids. Weekends when I had the kids were about them. Weekends when Thomas had them were divided between time alone and time with Andreas. He never pushed for more, never complained about the complications. He adapted to my chaotic schedule with grace. Sometimes the kids asked for Andreas to be present on their weekends with me. He'd come make pancakes on Sunday morning, take Ryan to play soccer, teach Sophia basic Greek words. But he always maintained appropriate boundaries, never disciplined, always left parenting decisions to me. That awareness of his role made me love him more deeply. 2 years after the divorce, I was in a radically transformed place. Weight was healthy again, anxiety was manageable, depression had lifted almost completely. Most importantly, I had rebuilt an identity that didn't depend on being in a relationship. I was Victoria, Ryan and Sophia's mom, competent professional, Andreas's girlfriend, but fundamentally just Victoria, woman who had survived hell and emerged strong. I started an anonymous blog, Letters from Amsterdam, where I wrote about divorce, co-parenting, rebuilding, love after trauma. The responses were overwhelming. Women from all over the world sending messages saying my words resonated, that they felt less alone, that my journey gave hope. Andreas and I discussed the future for the first time on a weekend trip to Paris. Sitting at a cafe in Montmartre, he held my hand and said, I'm happy where we are. I'm not in a rush, but I want you to know I see a future with you. When you're ready, not now necessarily, but eventually, I'd like to talk about living together. Maybe marriage, maybe even a sibling for Ryan and Sophia if you want, but only when you're ready. No pressure. My heart raced, not from panic, but from possibility. There was a time when the idea of marriage again would have sent me into a panic attack, but with Andreas, it seemed possible. Thank you for being patient, I said, for not rushing, for understanding I'm still picking up pieces. You're not broken, Victoria, he said firmly. You're healed in different ways, and I love all those ways, even the ones with scars. 3 years after rock bottom on the bathroom floor, I was standing in the tiny kitchen of the Nord apartment making pancakes on a Sunday morning. Ryan and Sophia were in the living room watching Dutch cartoons, arguing about the remote. Andreas was beside me preparing coffee, singing softly some Greek song I didn't understand, but found beautiful. Sun came through the window. Amsterdam was alive outside, and I was happy. Not perfectly, but genuinely, substantially happy. I had built a life that worked. I had a partner who respected me. I had healthy and loved kids. I had my own identity. I had survived what seemed impossible to survive and had built something beautiful on the other side. I looked at Andreas, who caught my gaze and smiled that smile that still made my heart do strange things, and thought, it was worth it. All the suffering, all the trauma, all the pain. It was worth it to get here. I wouldn't change the past because it brought me here. And when Andreas knelt in that tiny kitchen with a simple ring and asked if I was ready to write a new chapter together, finally, for the first time in years, I said yes without fear. Andreas asked for my hand on an ordinary Sunday morning in the tiny kitchen that had been the stage for so many small reconstructions and silent victories. There was no audience, no big production, just us. The smell of pancakes burning because I'd forgotten them on the stove, and the kids in the living room laughing at something on TV. He knelt there on the cheap linoleum floor and said, Victoria, you're the strongest person I know. Watching you rebuild your life, raise these incredible kids, find happiness again. It's a privilege to be by your side. I don't want to rush, don't want pressure, but I want you to know I'm completely committed to you, to Ryan, to Sophia, to this life we're building together. So I'm asking, would you marry me? When you're ready? If you're ready? He held a simple ring, silver with a small diamond, nothing extravagant, but perfect. I looked at him kneeling there, this man who had entered my life when I was shattered and never tried to fix me, just loved me while I fixed myself. And for the first time since Thomas, the word marriage didn't bring panic. It brought possibility. Yes, I heard my own voice say, surprised by the absence of fear. Yes, I want to marry you. We didn't set a wedding date immediately. The engagement was enough, a declaration of intention, commitment, but without rush. We spent a year engaged, the kids gradually adjusting to the idea of eventually all living together. Ryan asked practical questions about logistics. Sophia asked repeatedly if Andreas was going to be their new daddy. I always answered, "No, sweetie, you already have a daddy. Andreas is different. He's someone who loves us very much and is going to be part of our family in a special way." Co-parenting was working surprisingly well. All adults committed to putting the kids' well-being above egos. I married Andreas on a Saturday in May. Small ceremony at the courthouse in Amsterdam, followed by intimate dinner with close friends and family. My mother flew from Arizona. Andreas's parents came from Munich and Athens. Ryan and Sophia as excited witnesses. It was so different from the first wedding, it barely seemed like the same type of event. With Thomas, it had been a rushed escape, desperate hope that marriage would fix problems. With Andreas, it was a deliberate choice, celebration of love that had been tested and proven true. I wore a simple cream dress, held a bouquet of Dutch tulips, said vows I wrote myself. Not about impossible promises, but about commitment to choose each other daily, to build a partnership based on respect and honesty. When Andreas slipped the ring on my finger, I felt the full weight of the symbol, but this time it was good weight of conscious choice. Ryan and Sophia threw rose petals. Sarah was my maid of honor. And when I kissed my new husband, I didn't think about Thomas or the past. I thought only, I'm here, I'm present, I'm happy. Life after marriage was one of adjustment and blending. We moved together to a bigger apartment in Oost, enough space for everyone. Ryan and Sophia finally had separate rooms again. Andreas transformed the smaller extra room into a shared office. Creating a blended family wasn't without challenges. Ryan tested boundaries with Andreas, processing complicated feelings. Andreas navigated with incredible patience. Sophia had occasional nightmares about family breaking again. Child therapy helped both process the changes. But gradually we found our rhythm. It wasn't a traditional nuclear family. There were weekends where the kids went to Rotterdam to see Thomas and their half-brother Luca. But within that complexity, there was genuine love, mutual respect, and commitment to making it work. 4 years after marriage, 5 years after meeting him, 7 years after divorcing Thomas, I was pregnant. Unplanned, but not unwanted. At 35, I thought I was done having kids, but life had other plans. When I saw 2 lines on the pregnancy test, I felt complex emotions. Fear of repeating past trauma. Excitement at doing motherhood differently this time, with a truly present and supportive partner. Andreas was ecstatic when I told him, "This is a gift. You are a gift." We told the kids that weekend. Ryan, now 12, was quiet initially. Then he asked, "Does this change anything? About you being our mom?" My heart broke and repaired simultaneously. "Nothing changes about how much I love you," I said firmly. "You're my first babies. Always will be. I'm just expanding our love, not dividing it." Sophia, at 10, just jumped excitedly. "I'm going to be a big sister. I can teach everything." Elena was born in February, in the middle of Dutch winter, weighing exactly 7 pounds. Labor was totally different from the first 2 times. Andreas was completely present, holding my hand, breathing with me, murmuring encouragement in Greek and German and English. I wasn't afraid he'd disappear or be emotionally absent. He was there, completely there. And when they placed Elena in my arms, when I looked at her perfect little face, I felt something I hadn't felt with Ryan and Sophia. Pure peace. I wasn't afraid of the future, wasn't compensating for a failed relationship, wasn't trying to prove anything. I was just a mother holding a baby, surrounded by love, knowing I was safe. Ryan and Sophia met their baby sister that day, both gentle and cautious and completely enchanted. Thomas also visited. Strange but important moment. He brought a small gift for Elena, greeted Andreas respectfully, and didn't stay long. But the gesture mattered. It showed we'd all grown, all moved beyond initial hurts to a place of mutual civility. Motherhood for the third time at 35, with a supportive partner, was a revelation. It wasn't necessarily easier. Babies are hard regardless. But it was different. Andreas woke up for middle-of-the-night feedings, changed diapers without complaining, held Elena for hours when she had colic so I could sleep. Ryan and Sophia helped, Ryan reading to his baby sister, Sophia singing songs. We were a true team. Watching Andreas with Elena, infinite patience, obvious tenderness, unconditional love. Sometimes I cried from gratitude that my children had this image of fatherhood, of partnership, of healthy love. That was perhaps the greatest gift I could give them. Not a perfect childhood without trauma, but a lived example that trauma doesn't define you, that rebuilding is possible, that healthy love exists and is worth waiting for. My blog, Letters from Amsterdam, grew over the years, eventually leading to invitations to speak at conferences about divorce, trauma, and rebuilding. At first, it was terrifying, speaking publicly about the most vulnerable moments of my life, but it was also cathartic and necessary. So many women lived in silence through similar situations, thinking they were alone, that the failure was theirs. Sharing my story, not as a victim but as a survivor, and eventually as a thriving woman, gave permission to others to do the same. I started receiving emails from women all over the world. Your story gave me courage to leave. I thought I was the only one. Thank you for showing that life exists on the other side. Each message was a reminder of why I chose to be vulnerable publicly. Ryan is 15 now, Sophia 13, Elena 3. Complex and beautiful family. Ryan wants to be an architect like Andreas, which makes his stepfather glow with pride. Sophia is in a difficult phase, testing boundaries, discovering identity, but she's fiercely loyal and loving. Elena is a hurricane of energy and personality. Dividing their time between my house and Thomas's house continues to be reality, but it's become normal. Thomas eventually married Katja, and the kids have a good relationship with their half-brother. It's not the family I imagined when I married young and pregnant all those years ago in Phoenix. It's the family we built through choices and consequences and hard work of healing and moving forward. And it's enough. More than enough. It's beautiful in its own imperfect and complex way. Looking back now, more than a decade after rock bottom, I see the entire journey with clarity that only time and distance can bring. Yes, Thomas betrayed me, lied, destroyed the family we'd built. But I also see now my own complicity in accepting the unacceptable, in ignoring obvious signs because confronting them would have required courage I didn't have yet. I see how abandonment trauma at 15 days shaped all my relationships. I see how marriage with Thomas was doomed to fail not just because of his betrayals, but because neither of us was whole, healthy people when we got together. We were broken trying to fix each other, impossible and unsustainable. I don't blame that version of me. She was doing the best she could. But I understand now that healing had to come from within, that no relationship could save me, that salvation was internal work only I could do. Thomas was the catalyst for my destruction, but also ironically for my transformation. Without that rock bottom, I never would have been forced to face my demons, to do real therapy, to rebuild identity from scratch. If I were talking to a woman who is where I was, shattered, depressed, divorcing, thinking life is over, what would I say? First, I'd believe her. I'd believe the pain is real. That feeling like giving up is a normal human response to an impossible situation. I wouldn't minimize with platitudes about time healing everything, or happening for a reason. Sometimes horrible things happen without cosmic reason, and the pain from those things is legitimate and deep. But after validating the pain, I'd say this: you're going to survive. It doesn't seem possible now, but you will. One day at a time, sometimes 1 hour at a time, sometimes just one breath at a time. You'll wake up one day and the pain will be slightly less sharp, and then another day, and another. It's not linear. You'll have bad days interspersed with good days for a long time, but gradually, good days will start outnumbering bad days. And one day, maybe years from now, be patient with yourself. You'll realize you're happy. Not happy despite what you went through, but happy in ways that wouldn't be possible without having gone through it. Because trauma, while devastating, can also be transformative if you do the work of healing, if you refuse to let it define you, if you choose to grow through it instead of being diminished by it. And especially, I'd say this: don't rush into a new relationship. It would be so easy to jump into the next arms that offer comfort, use new romance as a band-aid for loneliness. But healing alone first is crucial. Learn who you are outside of a relationship. Develop independent identity, your own hobbies, a life that works without a partner. Then, when a relationship comes, and it will, if you want it to, but only when you're ready, it'll be from a place of wholeness instead of neediness. It'll be choice instead of desperate necessity. The difference is huge and crucial. Andreas was perfect for me precisely because I waited, because I did the healing work first, because I was in a place where I could recognize a good man when he appeared. And about children, if you have them, they're going to be okay. Not intact, not without their own scars and healing processes, but they're going to be okay. Children are incredibly resilient when they have at least one consistent and loving adult in their lives. Be that adult. Show them not perfection, but humanity, vulnerability, capacity to fall and get back up again. That's the most valuable lesson you can teach. I'm in Amsterdam now, the city that was refuge and prison, and eventually true home. The kids are excited about plans after school. Andreas sent a message saying he'll come home early. Elena is at daycare, probably terrorizing teachers with her huge personality. I have a few hours of silence before afternoon chaos begins. I look at photos on the wall, Ryan and Sophia small, Elena being born, wedding with Andreas, all our complex families together in various configurations. They don't look like photos of a broken family. They look like photos of a family that broke and reassembled into something new, and maybe even stronger, because each piece was chosen intentionally, positioned carefully, glued with love that was tested and proven resilient. Scars are visible if you look closely, but they also show where it healed, where it grew, where it transformed. I don't hide the scars. They're part of my story, part of who I became. They're reminders that I survived the unsurvivable and built something beautiful on the other side. If I could go back and tell the 15-day-old Victoria, being left with relatives, that one day she'd be here, happy, in a healthy marriage, with 3 beautiful kids, having transformed trauma into purpose, she wouldn't believe it. If I could tell the 24-year-old Victoria, pregnant and discovering betrayal, that she'd survive not just the marriage but its destruction and build something unimaginably better, she wouldn't have faith. And especially if I could tell the Victoria sitting on that bathroom floor at 29, considering if she had the courage to continue, that yes, she had courage, and not just to continue but to flourish. She would have thought it impossible. But everything was possible. And it's possible for you too if you're reading this broken, thinking life is over, questioning if you can survive one more day. You can, and you will. Not because you're especially strong or special, although you are, we all are, but simply because humans are extraordinarily resilient when they have no choice but to be. You'll find strength you didn't know you had. You'll build a life you can't imagine yet because you're focused only on surviving today. And that's okay. Survive today. Tomorrow worries about tomorrow. But know this. Tomorrow will come, and will come, and will come. And eventually those tomorrows will become a future where you're not just surviving but truly living. That future exists. Just keep going. Keep breathing. Keep moving. Keep choosing yourself every day. It's worth it. I promise it's worth it. My last message, and the most important of all, you're not alone. Millions of women before you went through devastating divorce, through shattering betrayal, through trauma that seemed deadly. Millions survived. Millions rebuilt. Millions found happiness and love and peace on the other side. You're not a statistic of failed marriage. You're not a victim defined by his choices. You're a survivor, a warrior, an incredible woman who had the courage to leave what no longer served even when it was terrifying, who put her own well-being and her children's above the comfort of the familiar, who refused to accept less than she deserved. That courage? It's already inside you. You're proving it just by being here, by having read this far, by still seeking hope and information and connection. So give yourself credit. Celebrate every small victory, waking up today, feeding the kids, going to work, taking a shower when depression screams to stay in bed. Everything counts. Everything is progress. You're doing amazing even if you don't feel like it. And one day, maybe not tomorrow, maybe not next month, but one day, you'll look back and see how far you've come. You'll see the strength you demonstrated. You'll see the beautiful life you built from ruins. And you'll be proud. So proud. I'm proud of you already, and I don't even know you. Because I know how much courage it takes to leave, to rebuild, to choose yourself. You can do it. You're going to do it. I'm rooting for you from Amsterdam. We all are.